Welcome to the Carolina Codecast. With us today is Sean Reid. Say hi, Sean.
Hello.
Glad to have you with us. So Sean
Hey,
was
thanks for having
a
me.
speaker at the Carolina Code Conference this year, and he pulled double duty. He initially applied to to give a talk for 15 minutes, and then we had Robert Roscom dropped out at the last second, and we had to expand your time slot so you could kind of jump in there and cover. And you did a marvelous job with it.
Thank you. As I said that day, asking me to speak more is never a problem. It's usually getting me to shut up or say less that we run into issues.
Well, there's no time limit on today, so we'll keep that in mind for any listeners.
Awesome. We know what we're doing for the next 24 hours. Here we go.
Exactly. So what are you doing these days? I heard you just started a new job.
Yeah, so I am now the lead instructor over at Carolina Code School.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I was an instructor at a place called Digital Crafts when we moved up here. Like a lot of companies, it moved online during COVID. So I was working out of their Atlanta campus. We went 100% online, moved the entire school online during COVID, which made it a lot easier to escape Atlanta. So that's exactly what we did. So we moved up here. And because I was already working in education, I saw that Carolina Code School was here. I immediately volunteered for SC Code. So I had been mentoring and working with those programs for a while. And the opportunity came up to join them as a lead instructor. And it was a good time for me to kind of make my exit from iHeartMedia and move back out of development and into teaching development. So yeah, I've been over there. What are we on? Week 3, I think. So it's been a blast. It's a good group. And like I said, I was doing a lot of work with them already anyway. So now it's nice to move from the volunteer role into now I get paid for this.
Yeah, they do have a really good group over there. I've been doing a few interviews to get this podcast up and running, and none of them except the original one with Joel so far have been published. But one that I did yesterday thought that the conference was associated with the code school, and just because of the similarity in names, because of the Carolina Code. But nope, the conference is not, or the podcast. None of those are associated with the code school. Just a happy coincidence.
Well, and I think there's a lot of like weird overlap insofar as like Carolina Code School was built out of the ashes of Iron Yard.
Yeah.
And then you have folks like Joel that were here because of work with Iron Yard. So it is this interesting, like I say the ashes, and then to just beat this metaphor to death, it's kind of fertile ground for more things to have spun out of. So
nice. Well, that's a good metaphor. That's, your students will remember those type of metaphors. That makes you a good teacher, right?
That's I have a degree in English, and that's the only time I get to use it is when I come up with ridiculous metaphors.
Nice. All right. So at the conference, you talked to us a lot about Figma and Storybook and design systems for developers. Can you just kind of talk about that a little bit and what you were hoping to get across with the talk?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been on a bit of a crusade since, well, that particular talk, I've given some version of it since 2015. So that one's been in the pipeline for a while, and it's changed as the technology has changed. And it wasn't, in 2015, I wasn't talking about Figma and Storybook, and it was a little more high level. And then it's gone super focused in. I've talked to, specifically like, here's how you do it with React or this framework. And then it expands and contracts as necessary. But all of it came from my first experience doing full-time web development. I felt like I was constantly fighting with the designers. And this is back in, 2009, 2010, everything was still coming through in Photoshop. We were looking at pictures of websites. We didn't know interactivity. And what I realized is that designers speak a language that they know. Developers speak a language that we know. And sometimes we'll use the same words and it'll have a complete different meaning.
Yes, that's very true.
And so that's where this whole thing came from, is I was like, I don't get why they don't understand. And I realized, because I'm not speaking their language. So I should learn enough of their language to be able to speak to them. And then hopefully I can have enough of my language get across, and we can bridge this gap. So the whole thing just was born out of trying to improve communication between developers and designers. If you Google right now, design handoff, you'll find, I don't even know how many pages about why the process sucks in most instances.
Yeah.
And a lot of that comes down to this communication situation where, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with you. Said yes.
Oh, an actual like even current experience when I was at iHeartMedia. So iHeartMedia has a set of designers that work across all platforms, and so that's televisions with Roku, that is CarPlay, Android Auto, the mobile app, and the website. And you've got these designers that are working across all of this. They don't know all of the technology, nor should they.
Right.
They're just trying to create a unified brand for iHeartMedia, iHeartRadio. And we were sitting in a meeting, and the designer we were speaking with kept saying components, because component has a meaning in Figma.
Okay.
And there were developers. I was the team lead, and I was listening on the call. I wasn't an active participant in this particular call. And the developers were saying components, and the designers were saying components, and it became very obvious that neither side realized that that word doesn't have the same meaning. A React component is a very different thing than a Figma component.
Yep.
They thought they were talking about the same thing, and they ended up kind of getting into this endless cycle. At which point I was like, look, let's clarify and like set our terms here. When you're saying this, is this what you mean? And then when you're saying this, is this what you mean? And once we kind of got on that level playing field, and they realized like, oh, okay, yeah, when I say component, that's not what I mean at all. And it helps smooth things out. And again, this, when you've got designers that are supporting multiple platforms, they just need to know how Figma works. They don't care about the language. And so if you're using a word that sounds like a word they know in Figma, they just assume you understand Figma as well, and vice versa. So yeah, this is kind of my crusade to say we can improve this. And now in 2023, there are tools that do this. So we don't have to have, I have historically in large companies, I've been in the weird place where I kind of am the design whisperer or developer whisperer, depending on which side needs to talk to the other. And it's like,
I can
there are
relate to
tools
that.
yeah, it's a weird sort of liminal space where you're like, I don't know a lot of this. I know a good bit of this, but I don't know which side of the fence I'm going to be on today.
You feel
And
like
so
the
now that
guy from Office Space. I talked to the engineers.
right, exactly. It occurred to me that like, well, there are tools that do this, and we have ways to do this. And arguably, I'm on a crusade to, in that regard, put myself out of a job, because if people use these tools, then they don't necessarily need to have that person like me in the middle. But
Yep.
thankfully, education still works, and so I'm able to continue to do this kind of thing, but in a different venue.
Nice. Nice. Well, I'm glad to hear everything's going well at the code school and everything too. That's so I know you've been involved with a lot of other things throughout your career, but before we got on today, you told me that you were involved with another podcast, because I noticed you've got a great setup here. If you're just listening, you can't see Sean's setup here, but he's really prepared to be broadcasting right now, and it's very impressive. So tell me about that a little bit.
So yeah, I used to be on a podcast called Theme Park Pulse. I don't know if it's still active or not. The person that founded the podcast is actually an on-air talent out in California, and so his schedule goes a little crazy. And I think he just recently got a job at KQED out there, which he's doing reporting. So time to hop on and talk about theme parks got minimized.
Yeah.
And when I started at iHeartRadio, my schedule kind of went really wonky, and they were West Coast, I'm East Coast. So finding time to line up was not ideal. But yeah, I was on that show for, we started off as a sponsor of the show. My wife and I used to be part owners of a theme park scented candle company that we had.
Really?
And we started off as sponsors of the show. And then somehow, after being interviewed on it, I weaseled my way into a semi full-time role. And yeah, we're just coming on and talk about like what's happening at I would do Disney World because I'm on the East Coast. They would do Disneyland.
Nice.
And then this time of year, we'd be geeking out about Halloween Horror Nights at Universal and all that stuff. Just we're giant theme park nerds. I've got, well, you can't see it right now, but there's any number of Disney things floating around behind me in my office, and I can see my my hitchhiking ghost from the Haunted Mansion over here. So
see, my family is really into theme parks too. So this really caught my attention. So like when my oldest was in fourth grade, and he was still at that age where the school would let us take him out of school for a long weekend, kind of whenever we wanted to. We had bought a really cheap RV, and we got an annual pass to Disney, and we went to Disney like 7 times, because you can stay at Full Wilderness down at Disney, and you don't even have to go on the parks, and it's just a really good time before Wilderness if you want to just go stay the week down there. It's just a good time.
Oh, absolutely.
But
Yeah.
we went down there like 7 times over the course of the year just to maximize the value of the passes. Because the annual passes, if you basically go twice in a year, you get the value out of it essentially.
Yeah.
And so we were just trying to maximize it, and we learned we explored every nook and cranny of those parks. I mean, we figured out the times of day. We would just stroll in at like 4 o'clock because you didn't have to worry about wasting your ticket for the day when you had the annual pass. And it was such a good time. And now we give people advice on doing this. So to hear that there was actually a podcast doing this, I could have definitely done that.
Oh yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I've never been to Disneyland. I haven't been out to West Coast yet, but after working with these guys for a while, I feel like I could probably walk that park without a map.
Nice.
Just because they've talked about it so much, and we've compared like, oh wait, you don't have this that we have over here, and so I look forward to see like, okay, how much do I really know, or am I going to walk in and I'm going to be like everybody else that's their first time at the park and be like, oh god, I'm confused and lost.
Yeah, like so we're actually planning a trip in February. We're going to go for like a quick weekend trip. So we like 2 years ago we booked a 7-day trip to Disney. It was going to be our last time. Like our annual passes has run out, and we said, all right, we're just going to do this up, and it's going to be great. We got the park hopper for the week because the more days you go on a road, the cheaper it gets. But we booked it in July, and it was after COVID, and they had stopped having the fast passes, so you're waiting for 2 hours in the line in the heat. We came in after the first day and just told the guy at the front desk, like, look, we're miserable. We're really, I mean, this is not our first rodeo. We know it's not normally like this here. We would like to just check out. Is there any way that we can do something about these things? And they gave us single day park hopper tickets for the remaining days that we had. And so we've turned that into a bunch of shorter trips, and we have 1 day left. And my daughter wants to use it for her birthday, so we're going to go in February and do that. And as we're talking through it, you know, my wife and I, we've been to Disney so much, we're literally just planning out the logistics of every little detail and the optimum route for like the perfect day at Disney. And I could not have imagined doing this before. Like we were one of the people who had to get, we got one of the Disney travel agent people to help us plan the first trip that was there because we had no idea what we were doing. And it's funny to look back and see the difference when you know what you're doing.
It actually became a segment on the show. We did it as a game show for a little while, and it started off as this really snarky joke that was like, you're doing Disney wrong, where we would you could see people in the park and you're like, oh, you made, this was a bad choice. Yeah. You should have consulted somebody. And then it just turned into me finding stories about bad guest behavior.
Oh, goodness.
And I would do just read out a description of the bad guest behavior, and we would call the person the eighth dwarf, and the panelists had to come up with a name based on the behavior. And all of the behaviors were almost all the behaviors were rooted in an actual story that happened. Occasionally I might embellish a few things here or there. And there was once where I took 2 stories and made them into one person, but it was always like, oh yeah, these are the people that just goofed up all over the people that are upset about a dining, like they can't get in on a wait list for a restaurant that has been booked up for the last 6 months because dining reservations were gone the minute people could book. So
goodness gracious. All right. So what was the name of that podcast one more time? Because I feel like me and all of our listeners are probably going to have to go pick that up at some point now.
So that one is Theme Park Pulse, and it may or may not be active. Like I said, it went dormant for a while. I haven't been on it for a couple years. However, there's another one. I'll just keep you in the loop for this one.
Yeah.
I used to work at a company called Mouse Dining. It was a small startup. It was literally 5 people.
Yeah.
And it's an app to help you find dining reservations at Disney World and Disneyland. We were talking a little bit about it before.
Yeah.
The owner of Mouse Dining, he and I have stayed friends. It was one of the greatest places I've ever worked. Unfortunately, it wasn't making enough money at the time, so that's why I don't work there anymore. But
it's a great idea.
Has wanted to start. Oh, it's fantastic. Because for those of you that have not tried to book a Disney dining reservation, up until literally 2 weeks ago, yeah, it's a nightmare. And up until 2 weeks ago, you could only see 1 day, 1 meal at a time. And so if you changed, you had to start the whole process over, and it was, a 4-step process.
And you had to go and look like per hour for the reservation times for your party size to
Yep.
see if there was availability, and like change to say, all right, well, if we did 6 people or 2 people at this restaurant, does it change anything? It was awful.
Yeah. And Mouse Dining made it, you picked your restaurant. We showed you a calendar of the next 4 weeks. You could change your party size. It would refresh and show you, okay, here's what's available. And you click a link, takes you right to Disney's website, solves all of that for you.
Nice.
And it's since been successful. It's mostly just run by the founder and the owner and the founder, they're brothers. And so they're running it, but he's talked about wanting to start a Disney food related podcast that talks about a lot of the stuff, a lot of the data that they've gathered running Mouse Dining and seeing people's dining patterns. And so there may be another Disney podcast in the work. We've been talking about it for most of this year. We haven't done anything about it yet, but it would also help if I would stop changing jobs. So
I can relate to that too, Sean.
Yeah, you know how it goes.
Yeah. Oddly enough, I'm actually wearing my theme park T-shirt right now.
Nice.
You recognize this?
Oh, I'm drawing a blank, but I have seen it. I have a horrible memory, though. I've also been hitting the head a lot.
You remember Chuck?
Yes.
Okay.
Nice.
Chuck, in my not so humble opinion, is the single greatest TV show ever created.
I've seen a few episodes, but from you are not the only person I have heard say that.
There are 5 glorious seasons, and it's got a very high level of rewatchability. So my wife and I have rewatched it. I think it came out in 2005 to start with. I believe my wife and I have rewatched all 5 seasons like 6 different times. We just recently watched it with our kids, and they loved it too. It is literally impossible to have a worse mood when you finish watching an episode of Chuck than you did when you started. So
Nice.
I think multiple people that are if you've got any type of need to have a more cheerful day, you should definitely just pop in an episode of Chuck. So the shirt says Nerd Herd for the people who are just listening. It basically takes place in a fake Best Buy called a Buy More, and instead of the Geek Squad, they have the Nerd Herd. And so I got this shirt and I wear it to theme parks because Chuck fans are very excitable. And if you wear this in a theme park, you have to wear certain things when you travel because it's a conversation starter. Like if I'm going through an airport, I always wear my Clemson gear because you'll get a bunch of Go Tigers as you go through random airports in different parts of the world, which is just fun. Yeah. But, you end up in the theme park and then the next thing you know, somebody's going, Chuck! And that was the greatest show. And you make random friends that way. It's, I don't know. It's a very strategic choice for your theme park experiences.
Oh, I 100% agree. I have my Stupid Judy, Stupid Energy shirt that I wear. Do you remember Ellen's Energy Adventure?
No.
Ellen's Energy Adventure that recently just got turned into the Guardians of the Galaxy ride over in Epcot.
Really?
Was it trackless? I think it was trackless. And the beginning was a scene with Ellen from Ellen.
Yeah.
Competing on a version of Jeopardy, and there was her nemesis. I can't remember Judy's last name, but the nemesis was played by, oh crap, and I'm completely drawing a blank on her name. Halloween. If only I had the internet in front of me.
Oh, sorry about that noise.
Oh, it's all good.
We can fast forward to the dead time in the editing process here, so we'll go with that. Ellen's Energy Adventure. I've never heard of this before.
Oh my God. It was well, to be perfectly honest, it was great for a 20-minute nap. And Jamie Lee Curtis, there we go. I just found it. So nice. Jamie Lee Curtis plays Ellen's nemesis, Judy. And Ellen is watching Jeopardy, falls asleep, sees herself on the show. When she sees herself on the show, she goes into this dream sequence with Bill Nye the Science Guy, where they travel through time. And so your Omnimover is moving through this with giant animatronic dinosaurs.
Oh my God.
Learning about the history of energy. And so the dinosaurs are obviously just talking about fossil fuels. And wow. In there, Ellen, because she's feuding with Judy, Jamie Lee Curtis's character, she says, "Stupid Judy, stupid energy." and somebody on Etsy made that shirt, and I was like, well, I have to have this because
That's where this came
that
from.
ride is, yeah, that ride is not very beloved, but lunatics like me that really, really enjoyed it and that missed the fact that it's not there. Like we are a small tribe of people that will definitely celebrate when we see somebody else within Ellen's Energy Adventure shout out. So
Nice. That is, I've never heard of that ride before. But then again, I also had a big gap in terms of when I went to Epcot. Like I went once as a kid with my parents, and then my wife and I, when we were dating, we went, when we were engaged, we went in like 2003, 2004 ish. And we just
okay,
visited, a little bit. We didn't really know what we were doing at that time either. And then we basically had a gap until our kids were old enough to go. And then we
right.
started going again a few years ago. And I don't know if it was in that gap in the middle where that ride was, but I've never even heard of it. So that's interesting.
Well, and it's also in that front half of Epcot before you get to the World Pavilion. And
Yeah.
so like it's on the opposite end. If
I've
you've
done
ridden
the
Test
Guardians
Track,
ride, so I know exactly where you're talking about. It's like right there at
yeah,
the front.
it's in it was that building. They tore a lot of it down and then built it new to house the Guardians ride.
Right.
But it was kind of over in that little corner, and it would be great to get out of the sun for like 20 minutes. I frequently would go on that ride and just take a nap and wake up at the end.
And just so our listeners know, I had no intention of spending half the podcast talking about Disney today, but that's just kind of what happened. So we're going with it.
I know. Welcome to the Carolina Disney podcast
Exactly.
for all of your Disney history needs.
Exactly. Did you know that Disney was supposed to be in Myrtle Beach?
No.
Yes, that's the original site.
Was it?
Walt Disney wanted to put it in Myrtle Beach, and I've got to go look up exactly what happened. But it basically came down to some zoning stuff, and there were some people that didn't think it would be beneficial to have it here, and so I went, all right, well, we're just going to go to Orlando then.
So he built it in a swamp, and
Yep.
Literally.
Yep, and it's just crazy to think about. But something similar happened in Spartanburg. I think they wanted to. I think they wanted to build a huge racetrack in Spartanburg to either start NASCAR or to do the NASCAR museum or something like that. And some people in Spartanburg were against it, and it ended up going to like Charlotte or something instead.
Oh yeah, there is. That's somehow whenever we go to Charlotte, we end up parking in the NASCAR History Museum parking deck.
Yep, exactly. And I don't know what keeps these giant attractions from ending up in South Carolina, but for some reason there's some people that did they just said, you know what, take all of that economic development elsewhere.
They're like, just get rid of it. We don't want it.
Yep.
But it's amusing when we were looking at leaving Atlanta, I would actually factor in how much more, like what was the drive time from wherever we were looking at, and do we want to be closer to Disney or further, how much further? And it worked out well that way. You're like, okay, well, if you move from Atlanta to Greenville, then it's just 95 south. So it doesn't add much more than about an hour.
Yep.
And we are avoiding 75, which I'm all about avoiding 75 if you've driven on it, particularly the connector through Atlanta. So I was like, okay, yeah, no, this works. We're good. We don't have to set off any alarms for Disney travel.
Yeah, if we sidetrack into routes to get from here to Disney, that's going to that is an odd passion point of mine. Like I'm absolutely obsessed now with taking 25 as far down as you can.
Okay.
So you just take 25 basically all the way into Georgia, and then you cut over to Savannah real quick, and you bypass going through Columbia and 995 and all that, and you come out at Savannah. And if you want to go the other way, I mean, you can also do the Atlanta, and you can cut through Athens if you want to skip Atlanta. So you can go down 85, cut through Athens, and then come out down on 75 a little bit farther. The 75 drive is just boring, though. There's just nothing there.
Yeah, I lived in Winder, Georgia for a while, and we would do the Athens bypass. Basically, you go through like Monticello, and then the next thing you know, you come out in Macon, and you're like, oh, good, we skipped all of everything in Atlanta. And because we were living in Decatur, and when we would leave to go to Disney, we would leave at like 4 a.m. because it was the way that we could guarantee. We lived right at 285.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, this is how we will guarantee that we are only in crappy traffic for maybe 5 minutes.
Yep.
And then we can just be on the road and watch the sunrise as we get further down south.
Do you know who Louis Grizzard is?
Yes.
Okay, good deal. So Louis Grizzard, for those of you who don't know, is a comedian who was famous in the Southeast for years. I think he died in like 1993 or something like that.
I think that.
But he was a writer for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He was a very funny comedian, and he would do these these comedy tours around the Southeast, where pretty much his material was preachers, Yankees, college football, golf, pretty much everything that would hit a note with a very distinctly Southern audience back then. And he was a very well loved guy. But one of the things, one of his most famous jokes, drove my. So I'm a huge Louis Gazard fan, and he always told this joke. I've listened to his stuff a gazillion times, and he always told this joke. You know, they say if you drive through Athens with your window down, they'll throw a diploma in your car. That ain't true. You got to stop. And so, the very first time that I drove through Athens on my way to Disney, my wife did not understand what was happening, but I had to drive to the middle of Georgia's campus and stop just to see what happened. Did not get the diploma. I was very disappointed.
As someone that, as a graduate of University of Georgia who took 15 years to get an English degree, I can guarantee you that they don't throw diplomas because I've driven through there so many times.
Nice. I did not realize you were a UGA
times I
graduate.
dropped out.
That's
oh yeah.
So you're guaranteed to know Lewis. He was also a huge Georgia fan for those of you who don't.
Oh yeah, he's a dog.
Yep.
I much to the chagrin of some of my neighbors, since we live in South Carolina now, I was actually a cheerleader at University of Georgia.
Oh, that's right.
For a brief period in the late 90s. So when people are like, oh, you're a Bulldog fan, I'm like, oh, I'm more than a Bulldog fan. I was a literal cheerleader. I still have photos and a warm-up jacket somewhere to prove it.
That's, you and I can actually relate on that a little bit. So I was in an organization at Clemson called Central Spirit. That Central Spirit had a $50,000 budget, 150 members, and like 12 subcommittees, and they managed everything around athletics that was not actually playing the sports. Like that was the group that organized still organizes like the First Friday Parade, the Homecoming Float Build. They do T-shirts, they do non-revenue promotions for like all the other sports throughout the year. And during football game days, in addition to blowing up the balloons and doing face paint for everybody, they don't do the balloons anymore. It's the group of people that sits in the end zone and waves the huge Clemson flags. Nice. And so my one claim to fame with this group was that whenever I was really excited about getting to be down on the field during the games for this. And after the first game, everybody just kind of showed up in whatever they happened to be wearing. So we looked like a really motley crew of people in like either shorts or jeans and T-shirts and stuff. And the orange overalls were a really big deal. And, they had a lot of history to them. And we can get into all that. But the only real orange overalls come from Judge Keller's in Clemson, if anyone's curious. But so I suggested that, hey, maybe if we're all going to be down on the field waving these flags, we should have some type of uniform. Let's at least all wear orange overalls. And so they've been doing that for 20 years, and I started that, and I feel very proud of that.
Nice.
But,
nice. That's awesome.
But yeah, so I was always down there in my orange overalls in full face paint to do this every single game. And so, you were a cheerleader. I can very much relate to that. It was a good time.
Oh yeah, absolute and it honestly came out of like UGA, probably similar to Clemson, was just so damn big.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't want to sit in the stands. So what can I do to watch the game? Like, from the field. Like I know squat about football. My younger brother has played football all through college. I just get all my opinions from him. But I was like, but I really want to see the game. And I was on a spirit squad, so I was like cheerleader light in high school, and I was like, I can do flips. And there's a gym here in Athens that I can train at. So I went and trained at the gym, ended up eventually making the junior varsity squad, which meant I got to cheer for women's basketball, who won way more than men's basketball. And
I remember that during those years, especially.
Yeah, the year I cheered, we went all the way to the finals and played Tennessee, and unfortunately lost. Which was sad, but yeah, I mean, Andy Landers had some fantastic teams, and here I am, like flying around the country on the NCAA's dime. It was fantastic.
That's
and it was
cool.
All because I was like, oh, I can throw people over my head and I can do a backflip, so I'll take it.
Yeah, when I was in school, women's basketball at Clemson under Jim Davis was actually really, really good as well. And then they had a dry spell for like 20 years, but they're starting to get really good again now too.
Nice.
But yeah,
Georgia's clearly a football school.
Yeah, Clemson's the same way. Football and baseball. Everybody really enjoys baseball at Clemson too. but yeah,
Nice.
very much so. So let's see. Trying to think of a way to bring this back to code.
Right. How do we circle any of this back? I just that talking about Disney and the English degree just sort of derailed everything.
Yeah. So speaking of Clemson, we had the conference at the Clemson One building in downtown Greenville at the Clemson's NBA space. Perfect segue right there.
Yeah, there you go. I tried to get the sign changed for my talk, but didn't have any luck.
I remember that was a hard no. I did work in some USC jokes. U of SC jokes.
Look, those are always appropriate because nobody likes Gamecocks.
Exactly.
Not to completely turn off the rest of the audience that is still around.
So, did you have a good time at the conference, though?
I had a blast. The conference was fantastic. It's the first. It's the first tech conference I've been to in a while, and definitely the first conference that I've been to since COVID shut everything down. And I thought it was really well run. It was fantastic to kind of just get to hang around and meet other people. I've met plenty of folks on Hack Greenville or the various meetups in town, but it was like, oh, I can put faces to names or avatars from Slack, which was really nice. I'm also doing some work with Neurelo, who is one of the sponsors there. So It was awesome to get to meet them in person and get to talk to Chirac. Like I talked to him plenty of times over Zoom, and I was like, oh, I get to actually, talk to you face to face now. So that's really cool.
Yeah, sponsor wise, I think they made the most of their sponsorship. I've heard from more people that were talking to them throughout the event and after the event than I expected to, I guess. But yeah.
So I'm doing developer relations for their product, and shameless plugs that they're not paying me for right now. The product is fantastic, and it was kind of James Shockley, local developer, is how I got in touch with them. Yeah. And when they first showed me what the product was, I was like, well, this will be the easiest thing in the world, because I already think this is cool. So now, yeah, you can absolutely pay me to go tell people how cool this is, because it's a fantastic product, and to keep us on the code front.
Yeah, they were a sponsor. You can talk about them all you want.
Perfect. So I've been teaching software for a number of years now, off and on. Where I like to be myself is always on the front end. I've taught full stack, so I can build backends in Symfony, PHP, Django, Express. I can. Yeah. Doesn't mean I want to. And I have been building a tool, basically a collection of bookmarks and good resources for students that I've just been collecting and curating things for years that was going to go into an app that I've never gotten around to building a backend for. I started the front end with a bunch of, just static JSON. I was like, one day I'll write a backend for this. Well, Neurelo just pops in. And so I was able to point Neurelo at my database, and now I have an API. And I didn't have to write the API. So I could do the parts that I enjoy, which is write the front end. And I just run all my queries through Neurelo, which gives me all of my post and get routes for the entire thing.
All right. So I'm going to segue in, because there's actually a related point for this for next year's conference. Nice. I have a ridiculous plan to build the most absurd conference website ever created. The intention is to have a Kubernetes cluster that has a front end in one language, and then APIs provided in as many different languages as we could possibly imagine, all pointing to the same database. And then I want to use some type of telemetry to actually capture performance stats on each of those languages, and then publish them out like Tech and Power benchmarks, so that we'll have a polyglot website for a polyglot conference. Nice. And there's no good reason to do anything like this other than just because you can and because it's silly. But I've been meaning to ask James about this, and so you might be able to answer it. Does Neurelo generate out your APIs in whatever language you need, or is there a subset of languages?
It just generates. So right now they're doing REST, and they're working on GraphQL. Okay. So it just becomes a RESTful API. Okay. And you point your schema at it, and it generates the API for it.
Okay. So, well, that might be a good way to get the Rust backend for it then.
Yeah.
Good to know.
Absolutely. And it can have I don't do enough of backend to know how those things work. There's actually another guy that they've got that's going to be doing the backend interface with Neurelo. I'm just strictly doing the front end. Right. But man, it took an idea that I've had sitting dormant for years, and I was like, oh, I can build an app now, and this is going to be so much easier. And I'm actually already sharing it with my students in this class. I was like, here you go. This is a thing that I'm rolling out. It's in alpha. Y'all use it. If you need more reading about any topic we cover in class,
That's really
go
cool.
ahead and check this out. And then I'm adding curation again, because I don't have to write the routes.
Huh.
It's like, oh, I can suddenly add curation into this, migrate the database and update the schema, and I'm good to go. So yeah, that's really nice.
I'm definitely have to check that out. That seems like it'd be an ideal way to at least do the Rust version of that. I am very much more of a backend developer. I always see. I have the front end trauma from the early years of Ajax development, where everything was different and you still had to deal with IE6 and all the inconsistencies from IE6 to every other browser, and how if you tried to have a front end make multiple requests, it would queue them one at a time if you were in IE, versus any other platform you could just send them all, and you would actually have to set up multiple different subdomains so that you could get it to send to different subdomains in parallel. But it would only do it was miserable. And I just got so frustrated. I was like, I can control everything correctly on the back end. And so I just gravitated towards what I could control more effectively. And but I've done the front end. I'm the same way as you. I can do the front end. I just prefer not to.
Yeah, exactly. Totally understand.
There are other people who would do it much better.
I've been trying to explain. So I try to work in history of where we are and how we got there, when I'm teaching this stuff to the students. And I was briefly introducing them to jQuery as it is. I was like, you're likely not to, you probably won't see this, but you might. Who knows? You might end up in an agency where they're still supporting some client that hasn't updated their WordPress in a number of years. So jQuery is still running.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, but here's what it did for us that was really, really helpful. I was like, this one method, this jQuery Ajax method, probably kept this little library that could alive for much longer than it should have, because making Ajax requests across browsers was such a holy nightmare.
Oh, yeah.
And as we're doing stuff now, I was like, y'all, I can't even mock something up that was as bad as it was back then. Just trust me, you're getting into the industry at a really nice time, because we have tools that make things so much easier.
So back in 2006, I worked for or 2004 to 2006 or so. I worked for Nuvox right out of college, and while I was there, so Nuvox is a business telecommunications company. It's Windstream in downtown Greenville now.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But when I was there, they rolled out a VoIP service, and I was on the team responsible for building the web portal for their VoIP service. And so this was early on in the days of right when Ajax stuff was first coming out. JSON was not even a thing, so we were basically just writing scripts that just sent text back, and we were parsing it in whatever language made sense to us.
Oh, geez, yeah.
And then we were sending stuff back to Java APIs behind the scenes on the other end of the company that were handling the back end for how all this stuff worked. And so it was a PHP front end with a Java back end, and then this JavaScript front end interface. And so this was before jQuery, before Prototype, and we were writing all of the JavaScript by hand. And I'm very proud of this, because there were three of us, just to give you an idea of taking you back to how this was. There were three of us sitting in connected cubes upstairs in Nuvox, and we didn't have Git, we didn't have any type of version control whatsoever.
Oh no, not that.
And so we were SSH'd into a central server, and we were all using Vim, so that Vim would tell us if someone else was already in the file we were trying to access, so that we wouldn't overwrite their code. And we used this process, and we delivered everything that we needed to do so far ahead of schedule, and it worked for 10 years without a bug.
Wow.
Across, and this was back in 2004, 2006. It worked in IE6, it worked in Safari, and it worked in Firefox for 10 years with no issues. And
that's impressive.
Yeah, that was without any JSON or anything like that. It was literally hand-coded Ajax requests. And I'm sure there were all sorts of crazy security vulnerabilities in it now that I think about it. But
look, if they did get exploited, they're not there.
Yeah,
it's fine.
But I remember when I first discovered jQuery. After that, it was just I was a huge advocate for it for the longest time.
Well, and I got my start writing PHP because JavaScript was a nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
and trying to get it sorted out. And I was like, and again, back then we were using JavaScript for like hover effects and things that we can do in CSS now.
Yep.
And trying to explain that to my students, I'm like, I
Oh,
explained
God.
to them what Ajax was, and I was like, and Ajax doesn't mean anything anymore. Like it used to mean asynchronous JavaScript and XML, but we don't talk to XML anymore. And I guess it would just be weird if they called it AJAJ, and because it's all JSON.
Have you showed them how to
So now
design
we just
websites with tables yet?
Oh, yeah. So the first time I ever taught web development, I was a systems administrator at a middle school in Gwinnett County, Georgia.
Oh, wow.
And they had a community school, and the person that was teaching web design, which was front page, stopped teaching the course. And they came to me and they're like, hey, you do the middle school's website. Do you want to teach this web design course? And I was like, sure, I can do this. But I refused to use front page. So I
can
had
understand that.
I had a classroom full of literal soccer moms. This is not me denigrating anybody. This is every person in that class was the mother of a high school student that played soccer or football. Like it was moms who wanted to know how to share photos with family out of state. This would have been 2003, wow. 2004. And I had them writing table-based layouts in Notepad and then learning FTP to upload the files somewhere.
Wow.
And I feel like there's probably a special place in hell for me doing that. But they all went along with it. Like, we all did it by the end. Like, I was like, we got it. They had web pages. They could share pictures. Grandma could see them. I don't know that we were optimizing them. I don't know how big they were. I don't even remember where we were storing them.
Well, back then, cameras would only take them so big anyway. So,
well, this is true. Yeah, like, and you had to use a camera.
Or you literally print them out and then scan them yourself.
Right.
Golly, it was a time, wasn't it?
Oh yeah. And so when I showed them, thankfully, Space Jam's original website from '96 is still online.
Really?
Yeah, if you go to, I think it's spacejam.com/1996. The original site is still online, and I can then use that to show them what a table-based layout and the height of technology in the late 90s was.
Spacejam.com/1996 did not pull up anything.
Oh, okay. Hold on, I've got it somewhere.
Let me try that again. Actually, hold on. Apparently, I installed a Firefox update while we were doing this, and it wants to restart now. But no, still no.
Yeah, it should be spacejam.com/1996/.
Oh.
The trailing slash might be important in this.
Oh, no. Okay, there we go. Sorry.
Who knows?
You have to type in spacejam.com first and let it do all the auto redirects to get you to the www site, and then do the 1996.
Oh, God.
Goodness gracious. That's amazing.
Oh, because, we have better technology now. So we have 8,000 redirects and 54 million different ad trackers and cookies.
Oh, the stars and everything. Yeah, this is all exactly what I remember. That's fantastic. Yeah,
and trying to explain to them that took the entire screen.
Yeah.
Like, you didn't have, like, now it's a little tiny box in the middle of a nice LED monitor. Like, no. You had your big fat 15-inch, weighs 200 pounds anchor on your desk, and that was the entirety of the
Well, you can show them the, with the Google Dev Tools, you can, like, just have it automatically resize to the 640 by 480 version.
Yeah. I that's how I teach them why we don't use tables, because it's not responsive.
Yep.
One of the many reasons why we don't use tables.
Also,
because it's
you can do it pretty well when you got it to do like there was all sorts of weird tricks that I remember being able to do.
Oh yeah.
My favorite trick from back in the day that still works, and most people don't know about, by the way, is when you're doing an href on the target. Most people would just write, and they'll either include target blank if they wanted to open a new window, or they'll just not include the target at all. But if you put just any word that you want in and make it a named target, like if you say, target Space Jam, then no matter how many times the person clicks that link, it will open in the same window. So it will actually target a specific window that you open. So if you have a bunch of links and you want to make sure that only certain ones open in certain windows, you can do that. So it's basically a superpower for blank to make sure people don't accidentally open the same link twice.
That is, you know what? I've been doing this a while. I've never known that. That's awesome.
I remember.
I'm going to totally share that in class tomorrow.
And it was weird how you found out about this stuff too, because you would just observe other stuff and you realize it. And so I had you'd observe other sites and you pull it in. So somebody pulled me into Yahoo Fantasy Football at some point, and so I got on there and I was looking at, and I noticed whenever you would open a player profile, it always opened that player's profile in its own window, and I started looking how they did it, and that was how they did it.
Nice. And I remember, and this is a technology, trying to explain this technology to folks who have never done web development before is very interesting because it didn't last very long. But before I learned PHP, I was doing server-side includes. If you ever remember SHTML.
I never did SHTML.
It was essentially, it's templating. You could define an area where a file would load, and you would save the piece of the file as an SHTML file that the server would then add in. And it worked well for a time, but I still found myself like hand coding, editing HTML text. I was like, there's got to be a better way to do this. And that's when I learned PHP. And it was the same thing. I was just like, I downloaded some package from SourceForge that was a Slashdot clone written in PHP. And I was like, well, I'm just going to edit this to make it do what I wanted to do. And I basically learned PHP by taking apart something and then putting it back together.
Yeah.
I was like, well, this is just Lego engineering at this point. You just, you take things apart, put it back together, and see how it works.
No, that's exactly how I learned. I mean, so that organization I mentioned earlier, that Central Spirit Group. So when I was there and as a freshman, my summer between my freshman year, I didn't land an internship anywhere. And so I was just taking extra summer school classes, and I hung around, and I decided, you know what? Central Spirit doesn't have a website. They have a whole lot of stuff going on with all these committees and everything. Like, maybe I'm going to just build them a website so that we can post when events are. And everybody approved it and everything. And so I did it. And it was just a straight up HTML site. Then we got going, and then we needed to post the minutes every week, from the meeting, because everybody needed to see those minutes. And so I got tired of manually posting them. I was like, well, the person who's taking these needs to just be able to post them. And so how do I do that? And so I started trying to figure out how to do that. And that led me into doing forms and into some basic PHP and storing it in MySQL stuff. And then 3.5 years later, that site ran the entire organization because I built a little tool for every little thing that the organization did by the time I was done. And I think that actually lasted for about, I want to say 12 years after I left. They were running the organization on that site. And then at some point recently, Clemson got a tool to manage clubs that they rolled out to all of the various clubs and organizations. But had a good run. And that was actually how I got my job at Nuvox too, is that side project for Central Spirit that I didn't think was real programming, because I was learning Java and computer science and stuff at Clemson. And I kept applying for these Java jobs, and I didn't really like any of the Java jobs that I was getting options for. And so a recruiter, I think it was from Robert Half, told me about some PHP job over at Nuvox, but it was actually closer to something that I wanted to do. So I was like, all right, but I want to transition into real programming later.
One of these days.
And oh gosh, yeah, if I could have a conversation with myself back then, it would be, an experience.
Oh yeah, I can only imagine. Well, and funny you mentioned that. So I was working at the middle school. I ended up coaching. So not only did I cheer at Georgia, but I ended up coaching high school cheerleading for about 7 years.
Really?
Yeah, I worked in the middle school. I worked at the school doing IT support. I actually went back to the school system that I actually graduated from. Like, I was at the middle school my brother and sister went to, and I coached a few cheerleading squads at the high school I graduated from, which was bizarre. Because I was not that kid in school at all. I was the little weirdo goth kid and theater kid. So to go back and be coaching cheerleaders felt like a weird rom-com.
Yeah, that actually does sound kind of, you could probably write something out of that.
I probably could. But so I was doing the IT support, and the school's website was really bad. So the principal let me take it over because nobody else wanted to do it. So that's when I started teaching myself programming. Forked that one thing from SourceForge that I ended up turning into its own thing. Yeah. And then as I was coaching cheerleading, I coached a middle school squad. I coached multiple high school squads. So then the cheerleading coaches that I was working with at the high school, they're like, okay, well, can you just write us a website? And we became one of the first places where after cheerleading tryouts, we could just post the results on the website. We didn't have to, which for those of you that have not been on any side of this, nothing will make you more uncomfortable than having to look at the parent of a disappointed athlete who has not made a spot on the team. And hanging these things in a window, it's like TMZ with paparazzi. They would hang out, parents would stalk the school waiting for you to go and tape the results to the window. I did the exact same thing at Georgia to see when I made it. So when we could do it on the website and we could just publish it and we didn't have to see anybody's face, it was glorious. And I ended up building a bunch of different cheerleading related websites for a brief period. I had a discussion forum that I managed that was one of the most popular discussion forums in the state of Georgia for competitive cheerleading.
Really?
And
tell me it was called something about cheerocracy or something like that.
It was so there was a thing called the Georgia Sports Vent that I don't even remember who ran. I think it's part of Rivals.com.
Dog Vent?
And yes. Yeah. So it's probably all under the same umbrella.
Yeah, Dog Vent is famous. I spend a lot of time on the Clemson Rivals site, Tiger Illustrated.
So they had a cheerleading forum that didn't get a ton of attention, and it often would get spammed by, football players that would come in and so I was like, cheerleading needs a dedicated one. So I just bought gacheerleadingvent.com. And for the first 2 years I ran it, I did it completely anonymously because I was coaching and I didn't want anybody to know
that makes sense.
That it was me. And I was like, I don't want the judges are petty. And I didn't want them hurting the teams that I coached because somebody talked some crap about them on the website that I ran. Yep. And it ultimately I built out and ran so many cheerleading websites. That was actually my first podcast experience, is I did a Georgia cheerleading podcast where I would do weekly updates, like my own version of Sports Center.
What?
So I built all of this while I was working at the school. So when I finally got my degree from Georgia and was trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up, I decided I wanted to do web development full time. And it was this body of work, much like your situation at Clemson. I had this body of work was my portfolio that landed me my first full-time web development job. Because I was like, oh, I have these, 7 different websites that I'm managing on a server somewhere, all written in, various flavors of PHP. And I did all the design work, which is probably why some of it's not very good. But yeah, so it was like this weird thing where it's like cheerleading of all things has become this weird central, like if I had to pick like a point, if I'm doing a weird conspiracy map, somehow cheerleading is going to be in the center. And then that leads to web development and a bunch of other random things.
Well, I can say I did not have any idea the conversation was going to go this way today. But
didn't have that on your bingo
card. Yeah. So as we kind of come close to wrapping things up a little bit here, what are you looking forward to, over the next year? Any projects you got? I mean, you mentioned you already started showing one of them to your students. Are you ready to talk about that here?
Sure. Yeah. It's amusing. One of the things I tell all of my students, and I've been doing this now for a while, the programmer's biggest enemy is spelling, and they find this out very quickly. They'll be debugging something, and they'll come in and like, I've been fighting with this for an hour, and I'll be like, you forgot a semicolon.
Yep.
I'm like, damn it. And in the true sense of that, I was originally writing this and I just called it like a generic bookmarks app, but I transposed the M and the K and wrote it as Boomkarks. And I was like, you know what? I talk about spelling being such a nemesis so much that I'm just going to leave this misspelling in here. And this app is now just called Boomkarks. And it's just a collection of bookmarks that I have been curating, and then I'm going to be letting my students curate, kind of like a Reddit style thumbs up, vote up, vote down, vote,
nice
kind of things. Flag stuff, like if I have links in there that, because I've been putting this together forever, I've already found at least 2 links that don't exist anymore. So that stuff can get flagged, and it'll be a community curated bookmark site in the spirit of something like Delicious, for those people that remember Delicious back in the day, where you can just sort of keep track of bookmarks in places. And again, that's built on Neurelo is the API for that. I'm using Remix on the front end, hosting all that through Netlify.
And for the dead links, you could redirect to archive.org if you wanted to.
Yeah, I absolutely could. So it's it's a lot of fun. I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying being at the school. I'm teaching this cohort and the next cohort, and then next year we're going to be looking at the program and looking at any adjustments that may need to be made. So I'm looking forward to those discussions with Alex Martin and Leah
Nice.
over there at the code school. I love being a part of it. I'm also continuing to do freelance work, so I teach semi full time. Primarily, I'm over there for lecture in the morning, and then spend some time at the next building in the afternoon. And still have a few of my freelance clients, Neurelo being one of them. So yeah, looking forward to it. I'm loving to just to lift your I can't think of the right word, to big you up. I'm going to steal a British phrase, to big you up. I love the fact that after the conference, I feel much more plugged in to the local developer community, which
Good.
is really, really nice. As a person that moved here, we don't have any family. We didn't have any connections up here. We just wanted to live here. But working for a company like iHeartMedia, that's, they're based in Nashville and New York. And so a thing that I was kind of always missing was that direct connection. And it's like now, okay, working at the code school, that's one of it. That's one of the things. So I now feel like I've got some roots here, but also being able to take part in the conference, meet so many other folks, get a chance to speak, make introductions. I've said multiple times to my wife that in the last 3 months, or however many months it's been since the conference, I feel like I'm finally plugged into the community here. And so
Been about 3
thank
weeks.
you for that and for the opportunity. Has it only been about 3 weeks?
August 19th, less than a month.
Oh, Jesus. I have lost all track of
Yep.
time.
Oh, I understand. I'm right there with you, but I'm very, very happy to hear that. We really do have a wonderful tech community here in general, and virtually everything just stopped in 2020. But at the same time, a bunch of people started moving here in 2020 as all of the remote work picked up, and we've had so many more people move to the area ever since COVID. But then the various facilities and activities and meetups and everything weren't here to pull them in, and so I'm really glad to hear that it worked for you, because that's definitely one of the biggest aspects of getting it together. I'm hoping that a lot more of the meetups get some more exposure and get going again. I know the big Hack Greenville Nights thing that I think is coming up on October 14th or 12th, October 12th.
Yeah. Okay.
But
I don't have my calendar in front of me.
Yeah, I mean that should be a really good time, and then hopefully the rest of the meetups will keep going too. But yeah, come join Hack Greenville if you can. And as always with every podcast, I got to say thank you to Herd Media for helping me put this thing together, because I have no clue whatsoever what I'm doing with podcast, and they're helping me figure this stuff out, helping me learn the tools that I need to learn in the editing process. I'm not a big enough fish for them to actually do the work and editing for me, but they did help. They did all the editing for the Joel podcast, but I'm going to be fully responsible for that on all the rest of them, and I'm learning my way through it, and I really appreciate all of their help. So thank you, Herd Media, awesome. Right here in Greenville, by the way.
There you go. Yeah, and it's daunting. Having edited podcasts, it's the whole thing is it's really nice that you have people that can help you do that now, because it takes a lot of the heavy lifting off.
They've shown me a lot of the tools that are out there to help with stuff like getting the transcripts together and all that. And Substack, where we run the conference website, actually does a really good job. I mean, you can paste the audio up and it'll generate the transcript for you right there. And
that's awesome.
Circulation's pretty straightforward. The biggest thing is just getting the audio and the video itself for YouTube up and running properly. But if any of our listeners are interested, you didn't already see it, you can see Sean's talk on the Carolina Code Conference YouTube channel. It's right there. It's called what
did I call it? Design systems. How hold on, I've got it in my it's how design systems can help you maintain product sanity, kinda.
Yep, exactly. And that is another example of me getting used to this whole podcast thing. I should have definitely had that ready to go.
I didn't even have it ready to go, so you're fine.
There you go. All right.
I couldn't remember my own talk. I couldn't remember Jamie Lee Curtis earlier, so it's totally.
And we should all be able to remember Jamie Lee Curtis. So.
Absolutely.
Yep. All right. Thanks a lot, Sean. I appreciate your time. This has been the Carolina Codecast.